everybody. Welcome to the December 5th edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get a quick take on the 150th anniversary of the Sand Creek Massacre that was marked last week by various commemorative events. Governor John Hickenlooper offered an apology on behalf of the entire state of Colorado to the descendants of those that were murdered. Patty Calhoun, you were on top of this whole Sand Creek coverage because of this big anniversary year. What did you think of the events and of Governor Hickenlooper's apology?
Well, I was at Sand Creek on Saturday and Sunday, and the ceremonies are incredibly moving. You do have the descendants of the people who fled, who managed to escape and left the state. I mean, the Arapaho and the Cheyenne are gone from Colorado because of Sand Creek. And so they came back. They were at the state capitol on Wednesday, and Hickenlooper's speech was incredibly moving. People absolutely appreciated it. The descendants were crying, and I thought the way he gave that speech was absolutely appropriate. He quoted Dick Lamb. He had talked to all the governors, and he quoted Dick Lamb saying the two most powerful words are "I'm sorry," and it was really interesting to see that 40 years worth of governors had also signed off on this plan. So it was a great ceremony, and we'll see what happens next year, but it's something no one should ever forget.
David Kopel from DU Law School and the Independence Institute. What did you make of the events and the apology?
I thought it was the right thing. As Patty said, it was powerful. Obviously, nobody in this state has any responsibility for what happened then, but you can analogize it to a couple decades ago when the Pope, who was certainly not an anti-Semite, apologized for the historical previous anti-Semitism of the Catholic Church in earlier centuries, and you know that was the right thing to do to put a definitive stamp to the end of a long-standing bad episode. It was interesting. The U.S. House of Representatives did a good job on this back when it happened. I mean, there was a big controversy right from the start, and the House Committee on the Prosecution of the War, which was mainly supervising the Civil War, in 1865 held hearings on the Sand Creek Massacre, and those records right from the start brought out the historical truth that this was not a battle between the Colorado versus Indians, and there were genuine wars going on in that way, but this was an unprovoked attack on friendly Indians.
Eric Sonneman, a political analyst, it seems all the reports about the apologies so far seem that Governor Cooper did a good job. It was a positive impact. What did you think?
I agree with what's been said. I did not know the piece that Patty just mentioned in terms of him having consulted with all the former governors. I find that interesting, to his credit and to the former governors' credit as well. You're right. The most powerful words in a public policy setting, this isn't really public policy, but as the ceremonial role as leader of a state, most powerful words can be "I'm sorry." And you don't want to overdo those words, but 150 years later, they certainly haven't been overdone. They were appropriate. Colorado wasn't even a state. This was, a dozen years before statehood when this happened. And it's important both for the Cheyenne and the Arapaho to hear, but it's also important in a current day context to keep that episode alive and to keep it on people's minds.
Natasha Gardner, senior editor of 5280 Magazine, wrap it up for us.
You know, from a political standpoint, I actually think it was one of Hickenlooper's most effective speeches in quite some time. He seemed more at ease, more comfortable with what he was saying. It was some of the old Hickenlooper, which I think is probably a good way to start out this next term. But more importantly, on a human being level, I think it showed the importance of apologies and the impact that a true, sincere apology can have. At the same time, though, I don't want to overemphasize that. It's not simply enough to say we're sorry. It's time for things to be done to move forward. And I think that's been set up, but also to think in a modern time frame, in the events that are happening right now in this country, in the city, what things are, and Hickenlooper mentioned, the things that are inexcusable, that we have to continue to talk about them and to criticize them, that still has to happen today. So the apology is a great step, but it's not the only step.
Ferguson protests have grown throughout the last 2 weeks in Denver to include students from various DPS and Aurora schools. On Wednesday, 4 Denver police officers were injured after being hit by a car while escorting Denver East High School student protesters. The Denver Police Union reported that some protesters cheered when the police officers were hit, but student organizers claimed that cheers came from adults that joined the protest. Patty, there's been a lot of walkouts since this happened on Wednesday, and there are still different reports coming in about what happened during that accident, which that car was unrelated to the student protesters. This has become a big deal. It doesn't sound like it's going to become any smaller deal anytime soon. What do you think?
Well, it was interesting because that walkout started right at the same time as the Sand Creek Massacre ceremony. So all of a sudden, you have the Indians whose descendants, whose ancestors were actually massacred. They were shot, standing there while all of a sudden hundreds of teenagers are running through saying, "Don't shoot." So fortunately, the East High students got the message that maybe they were in the wrong place, and they ran across the street to City Hall. Then they ran over to the mall. And so they did observe what the Sand Creek ceremony was and behaved themselves. And they were certainly enjoying their day out, but they were protesting just like kids are across the country. And then all of a sudden we heard the sirens going, and we were trying to figure out what was happening, because it obviously wasn't what was going on at the state capitol. And we heard the tragic news. It's just unbelievable that this driver happened to have what we've heard is some medical thing. He just smashed into the crowd and hit 4 policemen, one who's critically injured. And the reports are so different. I mean, the East High people, the reporters who were there, they said kids were not cheering the cops being hit. Maybe it was someone else who was in the crowd, and there were plenty of people. This is Colfax Avenue. Almost anything can happen. But now, as you kind of are unpacking the box of everything that's gone on, DPS is saying the kids were the ones who organized the whole walkout. And in fact, we've talked about it before with Jeffco. If kids know why they are walking out, if they know what they're protesting, as they did in Jefferson County, I think it's good use of civil disobedience. It is not good to cheer if a cop gets hurt. And the police officers, from everything we could see as they accompanied them leaving the Capitol and the city and county building, were being incredibly helpful to the students and really making sure they could have the protest, but making sure it wasn't getting in the way of other people too. So as we find this out, let's hope no students were cheering. Let's hope students continue to actually study the issues they want to protest. Talking about police violence is important, and what we've seen is that now the city is going to have meetings, which is good, that they're going to go to the schools and talk about how the police work. They're going to have community gatherings. So that's all to the good. It's just tragic that we have a critically injured police officer.
Absolutely. And speaking of those meetings, David, Chief Robert White of the Denver Police has been getting a decent amount of good credit for setting up meetings between student organizers and Officer Adzit, who is the one who's critically injured, his family, and also taking a measured approach to the reports that came from the police union, not from the police themselves. What do you make of the various events that occurred over the last 2 weeks?
Well, certainly the Denver protesters have behaved in a overall more responsible way than some of their counterparts in other cities. For example, at Seattle, a mob of thugs surrounded the Christmas tree lighting that was going on and shut it down and had all the kids in tears, and then their thuggish counterparts in Baltimore did the same kind of thing. And it's certainly not like the mass criminality that took place in Ferguson, where a bunch of criminals from outside the city came in and engaged in a looting spree under the pretext that this had something to do with the actual Ferguson case. Protesting and your right to assemble are crucially important rights, and it's certainly the right thing to do for people, whatever the merits of people think about the cause pro or con, a very legitimate thing to do. I don't think it's legitimate for them to walk out of school. And if DPS gives all these folks excused absences, then that would be political favoritism, privileging them over people who miss school for other unexcused reasons. It's also important that when you're exercising your right to assemble, you don't do it in a way that violates the rights of other people. To the extent that these marchers have gone down into streets, they created a intentionally dangerous situation. The reason you have parade permits is if you're going to have a marathon or a Martin Luther King march or whatever on the public streets, you need advance notice so that traffic can be redirected so that you can set it up in a safe and proper way for everyone. By failing to do that, they helped create, unintentionally but in a reckless manner, the conditions that led to these officers being injured. And I would also say that on the substance, the subgroup of them who were chanting "F the police" have it wrong. If you find that there were some teachers who sexually abused students, you don't condemn all teachers and go F the teachers. You look at what's the problem, maybe why is that bottom 1 or 2% of teachers or police officers or whatever still on the job, and you want reforms on that, but it's wrong and prejudiced to condemn an entire group for the alleged misdeeds of a few people in it.
Eric, where do we go with this politically? Because the protests aren't going away. With, sadly, more cases happening across the nation, it's only going to grow theoretically. Where do civic leaders need to go with this?
I think there needs to be rational dialogue on all sides. Yes, protests have a role. Protests, at the end of the day, can bring it into the public sphere. They can't necessarily solve the problem. First of all, I do want to pay tribute to the Denver police for how they handled that East High protest at the same time the Sand Creek thing commemoration was going on at the Capitol, and whether F-bombs were being lobbed at them or not, and we don't necessarily have the final word on that. They handled themselves, very well in facilitating this protest. I'm not totally sure I agree with David. I mean, I think if you take over a street, I understand where David is going, but I think with Colfax Avenue, the police had this under control until some driver, hopefully completely unrelated to the protest,
he did have a medical episode.
Had a medical episode, and pity the 4 officers that were hurt, and particularly the one who was hurt so critically. But they handled the situation well. This issue is only growing. I think it is rational, at least in my thinking, to be of mixed minds about the situation in Ferguson. And there is at least a rational argument that there should not have been an indictment of that officer because of where the evidence was. To look at that tape out of Staten Island, New York City, it is hard to have a rational argument, even for somebody who, over the months and years, has more often than not said the cop gets the benefit of the doubt because they're doing duty that very few other people want to do. It is hard to look at that Eric Garner situation and say anything other than this is outrageous, it is abhorrent, and somebody needs to pay a criminal price here, which now will apparently not be paid. I mean, this guy, he was selling cigarettes without a license or without collecting tax dollars on them. So give the guy a ticket, fine him $100. It's New York City, everything's more expensive, fine him $500. I don't care. But I don't even know that you need to arrest him, but if you're going to arrest him, you don't arrest him in that circumstance. These are legitimate issues. I do not know what their ultimate resolution is. You don't want to overreact, but you also, at this point in time, whether it's the situations we've seen in Denver or now around the country, it would be an equal mistake to underreact. Right. And not enact some reforms. And they cannot just be policy and procedural reforms. They have a place, but at some point, this is a cultural shift that has to happen. And those are a lot harder than just changing policies and procedures.
Natasha, it's been a long year in Denver regarding these kinds of issues. And frankly, I think as a city, we've been very lucky that something like this hasn't happened here, because if you look at the Denver Police 2013 and the Denver Sheriff's Department 2014, we have not had a good record. We have terrible videos to show. Fortunately, this kind of things that have happened in other cities haven't reacted here. What do civic leaders need to do to respond to the growing conversation based on all those outside events?
Yeah, I think this is certainly a situation you don't want to have had the horrible incident happen and then have to react. Denver was already talking about police, the body cameras for police before these incidents hit the sort of high point that they have right now. So it's interesting that now has expanded to a much larger national conversation. So I'm glad that Denver can say, at least we were talking about it, but Denver has a long way to go, both with the Sheriff's Department and with the Police Department, to establish some better guidelines and trust with their community. And connected to that too, I have to call out my fellow media for their coverage of this protest. Even this morning, I was seeing coverage that connected the injured police officer to the protest with no clarification of the medical incident. And moments like that, I cringe as a reporter, because I hope something like that would not get across my desk. I hope that I would be able to edit and catch that and do a better job of reporting facts. And it's disappointing that the days later, not in the heat of the moment, not reporting on scene, days later, we're still misinforming the public about something that may have happened. So as we look at what the civic leaders can do, we also have to look at what, personally, what the media can do to better present these topics and create a community for conversation instead of dissension.
A potential Tabor refund may set up an interesting discussion among state Democrats next year. Governor Hickenlooper included a Tabor refund in his budget plan for next year, but Speaker of the House-elect Dickie Lee Hullinghorst said in a recent interview with the Denver Post that the people would be better off if we spent the money on infrastructure and education instead of the $50 to spend on a tank of gas or something. David, it's been a week of inflammatory things, so this kind of slipped a little bit under the radar, and I don't want to just center on Speaker-elect Hullinghorst's comments, but we can have a pretty interesting political discussion here with state Democrats disagreeing about what should be done with the potential Tabor refund for next year. What do you think?
Well, the thing about the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights is it allows the people to choose. And people like our now new incoming House Speaker, Representative Hullinghorst, they can pass something through the legislature if they get majority votes. I don't think it would get a majority in the House. I think it's extremely unlikely to get a majority in the Senate. But even if that's the case, you can go to the ballot with a petition and let the people choose. And that's the way it should be. And if you make a persuasive case to say we don't want our refund because we've got something better to spend it on, then you win. And in fact, local governments win elections like that all the time, where they get to keep the refund they would have to give because they make a persuasive argument to the voters of the school district or the county or whatever about the good purposes for which they will spend the money. I think in this case, Representative Hullinghorst would have so far a more difficult time making a persuasive case. Because on the one hand, $50 is not that much to some people, but it's quite a lot to other people who find that they run out of money before they run out a month. And so if you have that extra $50, that means maybe you can you can fill up your car with gas even though you're not getting paid for 3 more days, and that's important. Besides that, if you said we're going to spend it on education in an effective way or on infrastructure we need, that would, if she had something specific on that could be persuasive. I would say mental health would be where I'd want to put the money. But we're a state that spends $1 billion a year on corporate welfare, where which is illegal under our state constitution under 4 different clauses, but it gets done anyway. One of the new welfare queens coming to Colorado is welfare king, Quentin Tarantino. He's worth $275 million, and taxpayer money is going to help him pay for the movie that he's filming in Colorado, although he'll claim that it's set in Wyoming. Not until you cut Quentin Tarantino off of the taxpayers' welfare are you in a position to go to the voters and say, we really need to keep more of your money because you're going to frivolously spend it on a tank of gas.
Or a Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yeah.
Eric, Ref C was an example of the legislature going to the voters, can we keep the money, and they were allowed to. That squeaked by. That was not a landslide victory, and that took a massive bipartisan effort. You had Governor Owens, you had Democrats, Republicans, the whole works, and that still squeaked by with Referendum D, a part of that, losing. It would seem you would need that kind of an effort to make this happen. Does it need to be that big, or can it be more simple?
Your question, Dominic, sort of just stole my remarks. I just echo it back to you. You're absolutely right. That was 2005, so 9 years ago now, but really by the time the 2015 session rolls around, 10 years ago that we did Referendum C. The companion measure, Referendum D, went down narrowly. C passed by a point and a half, something like that, after the most massive political effort the state has seen in many a years, and an incredible media drumbeat from what at that time was both Denver papers, and more importantly, a bipartisan coalition led, or at least having a key role, by Governor Bill Owens in his 8th year of office as he got ready to exit the governorship. I don't know that I see that bipartisan coalition here. I don't know that I see who is going to play the Bill Owens role, partially because there is no Republican of that stature at the State House, and secondly, just because of the polarization of these two parties right now. Your original question, Dominic, talked about the inflammatory comment of Speaker-elect Hollinghurst. I don't really think it was inflammatory as much as I thought it was condescending and largely just tone deaf. It points to the divide these days, and it's an increasing divide. We've talked for 10 or 20 years about the divides in the Republican Party. They're still there. But you're now starting to see increasing fissure lines within the Democratic coalition. And Dickie Lee Hollinghurst, somebody I've known for a long, long time, is emblematic of that sort of bolder, green, upscale, almost gentrified wing of the party, and she now controls the reins in the House of Representatives. There's a whole nother wing of that party that might have whether they're centered in Denver County or in Adams County or in Pueblo County or in rural Colorado or where have you, and that might have a very different take, not only on this issue, but on others. Lastly, it was at the Channel 4 debate that we were a part of, Channel 12 was a part of, where John Hickenlooper made clear that he favored these refunds. We'll see where he wants to go with this. But if you're going to have another referendum C kind of effort, it's going to take the governor of the state not only being part of it, but probably leading the parade. And John Hickenlooper's style is not always to lead the parade. If you build the parade, he'll run around front and be your grand marshal. But he's not necessarily going to build that effort. And I think that's what this would require, and I'm not sure I see it happening.
Natasha, do you think Dems are going to force the governor into a grand marshal role anytime soon?
Not on this particular issue, perhaps on other things. I think one of the things that's interesting here that we've sort of touched on a little bit is the idea that the politicians and the governments can spend our money better than we can. And I'm not sure that the public has that much trust in the politicians right now. What's interesting is hate Tabor, love Tabor, it doesn't really matter. I actually like whenever it comes up in the news. I think there's so many new people to Colorado that don't know the history behind it, that don't know how it works, that it's fun for it to come up because it allows for some education. But this is exactly what it's supposed to do. So if you do have better things to spend it on, which I think there are plenty of things in Colorado to spend this on effectively and in a way that would really truly help Coloradans, that's fine. Come to us, tell us what it is, and we'll tell you if we want to spend our money there. Otherwise, let me fill up my tank of gas.
Patty, wrap it up for us.
Well, I do think Speaker-elect Dickie Lee Hollinghurst might want to spend the $50 on sensitivity training on this. It was not a great comment, and if she thinks a little more before she says things like this, she's not used to being the Speaker-elect and being quoted probably quite as much, things will go a little more smoothly. I think maybe Governor Hickenlooper will continue what he started in his first term when he had TBD Colorado and they went around the state and they talked about what the state wants. This is a good time to kind of sum up, what does the state want? Do they want to put money into mental health? Do they want to put money into transportation? Do they want to put money into an education proposal that works a lot better than the last one that went down in flames? And it's a good time to have that kind of discussion. So I think maybe Hickenlooper will lead some of that discussion, but yes, he is not going to organize the parade until all the politicians and the people at the State House get on board for a really good plan.
Well, half hour has gone by quickly, so it's time for our favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. We've been off for a couple weeks, so there's probably plenty built up. Patty, start us off.
Well, considering all the outrages around the country where cops are behaving badly, Denver cops are doing pretty well, but the Denver Sheriff's Office continues to just blow it. Most recently by getting after one of those horrible felons at the Denver jail, a woman breastfeeding. And so they have a protest now, and now they have to have sensitivity training on what the law is. The Denver Sheriff's Department really needs to study their rules.
David.
President Obama, for naming clearly unqualified ambassadors who have no qualifications other than being his campaign bundlers, to Hungary, a country which has a growingly fascist government and is coming under greater pressure to move back into the Putin orbit, and likewise an unqualified ambassador to Argentina who has never set foot in the country and doesn't speak Spanish, another country where civil liberty and democracy are under severe threat, and besides that, always a very important country. I know it's common. He's setting a new record, actually, for political appointments for ambassadors, but it's so contemptuous of the people of those countries, and the opposite of the new approach that he promised he would take when he won election in the first place.
Eric.
Didn't know David was going there, but on to his point, viewers ought to check out the Jon Stewart clip from Comedy Central. Jon Stewart doesn't often go after President Obama. He went after him hard on this one. Real quickly, local law enforcement. Yes, the Denver cops did well with the march on Colfax, etc. But there's a Captain Joe Black who's been involved in 2 recent incidents, punching a fan at Coors Field, hassling a homeless gentleman on the 16th Street Mall. Yes, he got some sanction and I believe a few days without pay or whatever, but this is indicative of somebody who probably should not be in the police force these days, and somebody in charge needs to stand up and say, you need to find another line of work. Your demeanor, your temper is not suited to this line of work, and this is just one more indication.
Natasha.
If people haven't been following it, I would encourage them to look at the controversy surrounding Rolling Stone's UVA rape case. It's really blown up journalistically. It's kind of a, what would you do? How does this happen? Not getting into the specifics of whether it was right or wrong. I do worry about the chilling effects that conversations like this sometimes have on whistleblowers or victims as they come forward with their story. I hope that is not the lasting effect of this conversation.
Less than 1 minute left. Say something nice rather quickly.
Ken Turruff, the great author who just passed away, if you haven't read his Plainsong trilogy about Colorado, do so.
Steve Durham, who's going to be the new representative from Colorado Springs on the State Board of Education. When they were in the legislature together, he was my father's favorite Republican because although he was very conservative, he had lots of integrity.
Eric.
Dave Logan just won his 7th high school state championship with 4 different schools. What a great story, and maybe the people at Mullen who fired him a few years ago, maybe they want to have a second thought about that.
I'll second that, the fellow farmer pride there. Natasha.
This week, the Denver City Council approved the Globeville Neighborhood Plan. It's not going to solve everything. It may cause some problems, but it's a much needed attention for a very important Denver neighborhood.
That is all the time we have tonight. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed Colorado Inside Out, please consider supporting Colorado Public Television next Tuesday on Colorado Gives Day. We have a big matching grant that you can help us meet with your gift. Please go to cpt12.org for more details. For everyone here at Channel 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night. My name is Dominic Dezzutti. I'm executive producer and host of Colorado Inside Out. I am here prepping for the show. It's Friday just before 11:30. I'm here with our producer, Gabrielle Bryant. And the two of us, before every show, what we'll do is we'll get together and go over the script. Make sure that what we wrote the day before is still applicable, if any issues have changed. More importantly, we read through the script to make sure that what we wrote yesterday is actually going to sound decent today. That's usually easier said than done.
My job on the show is to check with Dominic occasionally throughout the week, and we send topics back and forth to each other as far as checking the news headlines and seeing which stories would fit best with the show. I've worked on the show for some months now, and so I'm getting the hang of some of the ideas that the panel likes to talk about and some of the things that they don't necessarily like to focus on. So my job is to check with him on the topics. He approves them for me, and then I try my hand at writing some of the topics and making them clear for viewers. Also feel like it's my role to approach the topics in a way that people who aren't necessarily so focused on politics will still be able to understand what we're talking about. So I try to write it in a way that people like me could understand it.
Gabrielle, it's the perfect sounding board that if I'm going way into too much detail. And so the normal viewer, she's a very educated viewer, and so are our viewers, but she's making sure that it makes sense and not just to political junkies like myself. So she's understanding that role. That's critical to what she does in the show. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Something that a lot of you may not know is that any trivia question in the world he can answer. And if he doesn't have the answer, which he always does, he can find it for you in under 5 seconds.
Just a nice way of explaining all the different stuff in my office between Yoda dolls and Harry Potter posters. I'm a person of the people. What we're going to do right now is read through the script to make sure it makes sense and sounds good, because it's one thing to write a topic, but it's another thing to make sure it sounds intelligent coming out of your host's mouth, which can sometimes be a challenge for this particular host. We do our very best to make sure that the script doesn't set a bias one way or the other. It doesn't put any sort of judgmental words. Now, no script is going to be perfect, but that's what our panel is for. They're supposed to bring the opinion. Our topics are supposed to simply set up the idea and then let our panel get to it. So we try to get as basic as possible.
I'm just making copies for of the scripts for each of the guests, each of the panelists, and I also make a copy for Dominic. I do it on this blue paper because it's not so distracting for viewers when they're watching it.
With the trusty makeup, tea, I think we're in good shape. Let's go.